We got in the truck just before the sun went down. We stopped at the gas station before driving north up Jericho. We had blown through 2 entire packs of cigarettes today. Somehow a smile remained on Ashton's face as she lit her grit. She put a cassette in the player, then rolled down the window. I don't want to be buried in a pet cemetery, don't want to live my life again, Ashton sang as she looked out the window at the tree line. Her hand crept up and found my leg as we passed the site of the accident. We pulled off and put on chains once we saw the thick blanket covering the road. There was no way we could get through without them since the plows have not made it to this part of the mountain in a while. It got worse the higher we got in elevation. Northridge received at least 7 feet of snow over the last few days. No one has plowed the lots in days. The fog was very thick in this part of town, it was hard to see the glow from the streetlights. We took a left onto a street called Eagle, then right onto River Avenue. After 5 miles of winding roads, we reached the home. A 2-story wood structure with a long driveway. Far, far away from neighbors. There was a lock on the gate in the front of her driveway. Not a gate lock, but a chain with a padlock. Attached was a heavy laminated paper that read, "Private property, violators will be prosecuted." It had been stamped by the city. Ashton got out of the truck and pulled the seat forward. She grabbed the bolt cutters and walked over to the gate. Once we got the lock off, we put the cutters in the truck and grabbed our backpacks. It was dark, the night was silent, the street light in front of her home was flickering, the plants are well overgrown. We took our flashlights out and lit a cigarette. Ashton put her camera strap around her neck as I grabbed the book with the picture from my backpack. The front door had another padlock from the city, the windows were boarded shut. I grabbed my screwdriver and went to the backyard. I unscrewed the wooded panel and placed it next to the window. Ashton climbed through before I did to make sure my weight could be supported by the dresser on the other side. The inside of the Bringstons' home looked untouched and as if she was still living here. The furniture was all there, the shelves were all there. There were crosses on every wall of the home. The pot was still on the stove and full of water, the pictures were still on the wall. 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 Stood alongside her new husband in many of the photos. Hiking, dancing in Italy, thriving in Merlot. They were old photos from around the time they first got married. For the last 5 years, she lived alone. She did not like to have people over. I looked at one of the bigger photos on the wall by the fireplace. It was Jacob. A wide smile on his face. We went upstairs and walked into the first room on the right. There was a bunk bed, along with a desk on the opposing wall. There were dolls and action figures blanketing the floor. The room across from it was locked. I know it's not right to destroy someone else's shit, but I kicked that door down. The room was painted a bright blue, coloring books and toys still lay on the carpet. A large portrait of the sun with a blank face was painted on the center of the wall, right above the bed. It didn't feel right in this room, it felt unwelcoming, it felt raw. We looked through some of the drawers and in the closet, but couldn't find anything pertinent. His sheets were dusty, the crayons lay scattered across his desk. When we looked under the pillow, we found a piece of paper that had been ripped from a notebook. I flipped over the paper and shined my light on it. It read, "I found you. I don't like this baby," Ashton said as she shined her light on the TV stand, then illuminating more photos that sat in standing picture frames. A thud could be heard from downstairs. The air grew tense, the corners of the room grew a little darker. We eventually made our way to the home office. There was a computer monitor in the center of the desk. There were 2 walls full of books. The bookcases were custom oak, a bit fancy. The rug was thick and soft, the lamps were old but in great shape. It did not take long to start finding the medical files. We saw face sheets from doctor visits, diagnostics, medication recommendations. He was prescribed Ritalin, that was it. The more I read, the clearer it became that Jacob was a healthy young boy. There was a lot of medical information on Jacob but none that said anything about Jacob being mentally incompetent nor handicapped. I went through every file I could find, I opened every fucking folder. Every single fucking folder. Nothing. Nothing at all. There was a stack of ungraded pictures still on her desk from the time she was a teacher. There were photos of Jacob that she kept in her desk drawer. These photos all had the eyes scratched out. The only other documents I found were from the birth she gave in 1973 along with x-rays, and diagnostics of her new children. I decided to grab those folders as well. We made our way into the master bedroom. Clothes were laid out on the bed. They looked fancy. Heel sat next to a dresser. We searched the room and found nothing worth taking. The mirrors in the room were all broken. Shards of glass lay scattered across the floor. We were looking in her bathroom when we heard a thud come from the hallway. Guided only by the light of our flashlights, we crept slowly around the corner. A house phone that lay mounted on the wall outside Jacob's room was blinking red. There was no power to the home. The phone light should not be on. We walked over to find she had a few voicemails. We pressed play and stood back. The first message was from her doctor, stating they increased the dose of her medication. The second message was from the school. It was a colleague named Mr. Lenk. He said he was excited about the upcoming date and that he will pick her up at 9 p.m. This message was left 3 hours before she died. The last message was from her Mrs. Bringston at 3:37 p.m. There was some static to the message, but she sounded like she was trying to keep herself from sobbing. I don't know if you can hear me. I am at a payphone and the wind is picking up. I just wanted to see my boy. I wanted to see Jacob again. His grave has been torn up. His gravestone has been defaced. It truly breaks my heart that someone would do this to my boy. I will not make it home tonight. I am so sorry. I would like to be buried next to Jacob. Please make sure they do that for me, Forrest. And tell the family of the ones I took with me, that I am truly sorry. I just want to be with my son. The light to the phone went off, the house was silent. We walked down the rest of the hallway, down the stairs, and into the living room. I shined my light on the photo of Jacob and Mrs. Bringston one more time before leaving. His eyes. They moved. Ashton said as she walked back around the couch, and toward the photo. I continued to shine my light on the picture as I walked around the other side of the couch. What the fuck, I said aloud as I watched his eyes look over at Ashton, then back at me. Forrest? Forrest, let's go, baby. I'm not feeling good, Ashton said, holding her stomach with a concerned look on her face. His hand also moved slightly before his eyes looked back at Ashton. His smile was slowly turning into a more unpleased expression. We turned around and walked quickly towards the missing panel. The backyard was huge, with at least 2 acres of open land in all directions. Mr. Bringston's shack was 300 feet in front of us and about 200 feet from the nearest tree line. As we were walking over, I began to feel the pressure between my fingers again, like someone is holding my hand. I wasn't going to pull my hand back, not this time. We walked around the shack once before breaking the lock off the door. This wasn't a government lock, I'm sure it belonged to Mr. Bringston. There was a mattress on the floor on the right side, there was foil on all the windows but one which ended up having weathered blinds stained from cigarette smoke. There was a rope that had been anchored to the ground at the head and head end of the mattress. The ropes had dried skin and hair embedded in them. There were stains and scratch marks on the walls and floors. The pressure on my hand disappeared for a moment. We then heard a noise coming from the wall, left of the mattress. We shined our flashlights on a nightstand with a lamp on top of it. The drawer partially open. It was filled to the brim with photos. Photos of children, photos that he took. Some from a far distance and in a public setting while others were taken in this shack. Now and then I would find a photo of Jacob, at least 30 total, from when he was 4 up until he was 8. Every picture had a small lock of hair stapled to the back, along with a date. Some photos were black and white, some dates were from the 40s and 50s. There was a large bottle of pills labeled diazepam. That's Valium, Ashton said with her hand covering her mouth. He was giving the kids sedatives? I said softly to myself. The shack smelled like mold and mildew, probably the worst smell I have experienced since Willow Creek. There was a journal that sat next to the bottle of pills. I put the journal in my backpack along with the large stack of photos. I am sure someone on the investigative side would appreciate these. I need air, let's get out, Ashton said as we turned around to leave. She then ran to the side of the shack and threw up. It was hard to take in the air. I struggled for a little to catch my breath. We walked a few yards into the cold and stood facing the shack. After we drank some water, we both took a couple of swigs of the flask. Ashton took the radio box out of my backpack. We lit our cigarettes and turned on the power. The moment I turned the box on, the sound of soft crying could be heard from the entrance to the shed. I knew it was him. No, No, please, I'm so scared. I want my mom. I want my mommy. Stop, I'm sorry, mommy. No. No. I can't. Won't. I'm sorry. I am so sorry, mommy. I am so sorry, Forrest. The sobbing grew louder as we continued to stare at the doorway. I couldn't see anything, but it felt like something was approaching us. What's going on, buddy? Who are you talking to? I said as we stood still. Ashton had a tear running down her face. I was feeling it too. There was a tremendous amount of pain in his voice. Forrest, I feel something around my hips, Ashton said as she looked down. Stay still, sweetheart, I said aloud. It feels like someone's head is against my stomach. What do I do, Forrest? She said, a little startled while looking down at her hips. The crying began to fade for a moment. The king won't leave me. He won't leave. Is he here now, sweetheart? Ashton said aloud. He is always here, Jacob responded. Killed. Dad. Killed. Bishop. He found me.
He found you.
Jacob added. I began to feel pressure on my hips and legs as well, but there was more than one. Almost as if I was being hugged by many small kids. It was obvious to both of us at this point, Jacob was not the only one that could be heard crying through the box. How can we help you, buddy? I asked as I looked at Ashton wiping her tears. Read the book, the voice said. That was the last voice that came through the spirit box before it died. We stood in complete silence in their backyard, between the shack and the house. After a period of heavy winds began to fade, the other sounds began to come from behind the shack by the tree line. After a couple of branches broke near the tree line, we gathered our things and took the last of our photos. We walked around the side of the house and made our way to the truck. We drove as quickly down the rural back roads until we reached Northridge. We passed the school and started down the mountain on Jericho. The snow had stopped for now. A thick fog encompassed the mountain. There is a small dirt lot just past a chain station on the side of the road. A few miles from our turn. Ashton and I usually pull off here when we're out late. I backed into a spot next to the guardrail. I grabbed a towel and a bottle from my backpack while Ashton grabbed the pile of blankets. I left the truck running with the cab window open. I dried the bed of the truck after clearing it of snow. We had a good view of Merlot from where we were. We sat and smoked our cigarettes. The glow from the city lights made its way through the passing clouds. We have a mixtape full of ambient drum and bass instrumentals that we like to play when we were here. Ashton sat between my legs with the blanket wrapped around the two of us. Jacob was the focus of the conversation. We were truly horrified and disgusted by what we saw in Mr. Bringston's shack, but we were more torn about what that meant for Jacob. Not only did he endure the horror of Willow Creek and the Bishop, but before all of that, Jacob also endured the same horror from his own father from the age of 3 up until he was given to the Bishop. At least 50 different photos of children other than Jacob, 50 individual kids that Mr. Brigston drugged and molested. 50 children were taken from their families, 50 children that never made it home. If he is capable of such things, he is probably capable of murdering a person and undoubtedly had Mrs. Brigston traumatized beyond comprehension. It is no wonder that Mrs. Brigston did not say anything to anyone. She couldn't. She was forced to watch from her window while her husband caused tremendous acts of cruelty and dishonor. I held her for about an hour while we took in the night. We started laughing once again after we got everything off our chest. A couple of cars drove past us along with the plow, all making their way down Jericho. We could see lights flashing in the distance coming from Merlot. The critters could be heard in the brush. Police and emergency sirens coming from Merlot faded into the wind. An owl flew over our heads only to circle back and land on a neighboring branch. Ashton grabbed her camera and got a few photos. It stayed with us for about 10 minutes while we drank from the bottle. The snow started falling again and the tape kicked from the player after the last track finished. Once we made it home, we immediately went to our bedroom after feeding Grim. We had enough tonight. I wanted to read the journal, but tonight was not the night. I held Ashton as we watched a comedy until we fell asleep.